And vice versa. Yeah. No, years ago, it got to be too cumbersome. I used to have it where you didn't write your name on your essay, you just write your number, like your student ID. So then I didn't know, looking at it, that it was Libby or it was Emily or anything like that. Yeah, yeah. So with the TW, it became pointless with the TW. But yeah, instead of, Virginia, all right, this isn't going to be good. It was, yeah, just great for what it was. All right, so we left off this, right? We left off with treatment of mentally ill. I talked about satire, and you could go with irony, exaggeration, humor. Morgan had a kind of look on her face, and we ended at a happy spot. So there you go. Keep in mind, and again, not the saying you're definitely going to have an essay with treatment of the mentally ill or definition of sane and insane, but these things certainly kind of cover the gamut, all six of them, that are on your sheet. So if you're good with them, you should be in pretty good shape. And there's certainly overlap among them. But if you have something like this where you want to get into the satirical nature of it, by going with satire, you're arguing that there's a social commentary, so there's some kind of aspect that you believe needs reform. You wouldn't use satire as the device itself. It would be more kind of a purpose. So you could argue that irony, exaggeration, and humor satirize the treatment of the mentally ill on the nurse's ward or in the hospital, if so given with the prompt. But you don't want to try to use satire as a device itself, because that's just going to be so much stuff that's going on there. But a natural breakdown could be that irony, could be that exaggeration, could be humor, and certainly, the irony could even be, if we talked about with McMurphy kind of having that savior quality to him, the irony that someone as horrific as him ends up being a person who's actually going to help out these people on the ward more so than any of the nurses or doctors would. That in itself can be part of the irony, the commentary, that treatment with the mentally ill. Anything else with this one coming to mind so far as examples? Not necessarily the devices, but where you feel that issue would be coming up, or are we ready to check out something else? It's kind of hard to pick up after 24 hours. Down, think of frosting before TWA. That might forget. Right? Should Brandon come in tomorrow, don't give him any frosting. All right, so ones that we have left: hero, anti-hero qualities, definition of sane and insane, power, control, and then down here at the bottom, change, growth, and patience. Of those, which ones would be more concerning?
I feel like the definition one, and again, which is like the
Do you, and this one can certainly go, it could potentially go in a lot of different directions with it. Any scenes or examples kind of come to mind, not rhetorical analysis, but just like plot-wise or character, where you could see these two terms kind of being questioned?
I remember one part where, I forget who said it, but it was like, the people need to adjust to society, so that was their, it wasn't they were just couldn't fit in a way.
Okay.
And then it was either the lifeguard or McMurphy just said he had a class on because
Lifeguard. Yeah. So with can't let Hannah come in and knock it or let her return quiz. Not within the story, but if we were to say insane, and not like in a slang kind of way, that literary term quiz was insane, but more in like a clinical way. What do we mean? What should be meant by insane? If you're going to go from like a medical diagnosis. Okay. That's a pretty good definition. are there any patients on the ward that would fit with that description? That there are, not all the time, but that there are breaks from reality. Yeah, where he'll hallucinate, so he has a difficult time playing Monopoly. Or he'll be, fighting at the control panel. He's flying it like it's a fighter plane and, shooting guys down. And we're like, what are you doing? So yeah, Martini would be one. Chief would certainly be one. At some points when, you come to the combine and the idea of clocks going backwards and all of that stuff. So there certainly would be people who would fit that traditional clinical definition with it. But if you're getting into the Hardings, if you're getting into the Bibbits, those kind of characters, why would they be diagnosed, and I'm going to go quotation mark, insane, as opposed to that clinical break from reality? All right, so, and really, you could probably word it in two different ways, one of which being cannot cannot function properly in society. And a second one, I'm thinking very related to this one, but almost kind of flipped. It's not so much that they cannot function in society, and in a lot of ways they can, but it also would be that society, if you make that the subject, does not accept them, maybe cannot handle them, or doesn't want to try to accept something along those lines. I'll say fails to accept. So essentially where we have this break from reality here for 1 and 2 with these definitions, it's basically that it is quote unquote, something different about them. Harding, sophisticated, intellectual, well-spoken, certainly seems to have a grasp of everything. Yet he's marked as something being wrong with him because he cannot, fit in. So at least that conflict, that dilemma about what does it really mean to be sane, insane, it's not going to fit with all those patients. I think you could probably think of some individuals in the book who are supposed to be sane, yet their actions would lead you to think otherwise. And those kind of come to mind. Sane, based on social views, but based on us taking a look at it going, no. Okay. And he's one where he's kind of in the middle, where I think some people are going to go, oh, he's perfectly sane, or he's kind of insane, but there's certainly questions about him. What with his like what parts for him would you say is where that insanity could lie?
Like when a good example is when he punches in the glass.
Okay.
Like he's going up against the system.
Yeah, and constantly rebelling no matter what. Okay, so. Constantly fighting the system. Who else? Nurse Ratched. Same thing. How come?
I think there's actually one particular book, or one particular part in the book where I forget who says it, but basically she puts on, she's around these people so much that it hides her own insanity. It makes her look more sane when in reality she's not, because she's always putting on this persona of what she is, and she hides all of her behind this plastic smile.
Okay.
It manipulates everybody to do what she wants.
Certainly the nurse up on Disturbed ward is critical of her, where she goes, her actions are pretty much insane. I think yesterday we were talking about them watching the World Series, watching the World Series, the blank TV screen. Chief makes the comment that if someone were to walk by, they'd have a hard time figuring out who's the patient and who's the doctor or who's the one in control because she's flipping out on them for basically doing nothing. So between her ability to manipulate, the treatments that she uses. Anyone else? I'd say those are going to be our two main ones. All right. So what, and certainly more examples of things can exist where we have this conflict between sanity and insanity. do you see anything device-wise that would start to kind of work its way into ideas, examples that we have set up? That's the tricky part.
Maybe we were saying like one of the other ones, the wolf rabbit.
Okay.
With Nurse Ratched being like the manipulator and everything.
And really, yeah, we're going wolf, rabbit, prey, predator. So you have people who cannot function properly or fail to be accepted, and so how do you make those individuals feel less confident, comfortable about themselves? Emphasize those weaknesses, manipulate it to use it to your own benefit. Certainly using Billy's mom as a way to make him uncomfortable would be such an example. And the types of questions, line of questions that you're doing with Harding, involving his wife, making him feel uncomfortable, those would all be things that you could certainly kind of take a look at. So yeah, that idea of predator-prey imagery, wolf-rabbit. I saw another hand go up.
There's definitely some ironic moments, especially if we would make like he's like a quote. What are you guys, crazy or something? Like, I don't know exactly what it is, but that just
And I mean, you go with what Julia was saying. You have the crazy one
yeah.
talking to those who are, in a lot of ways, perfectly normal. But what do they? And we've already kind of certainly said this. Why are they there? Because they choose to be there. Because again, once they can go out pretty much at any time. Billy can legally leave. Harding can legally leave. They choose not to leave. So it's not only that society fails to accept them, but as was stated before, they can't function and they feel the need to kind of be there. And you can argue in a way that's, in some ways almost like that kind of break or that detachment from reality that, you have the ability to function, you have the ability to maybe try to change things, but you certainly allow those outside influences to determine, what is wrong with you, if that is a fault, if that is something that therefore needs to be changed. For a lot of them, there's not really something that can be changed. You're not really going to change Billy's stuff. You're not going to change Mason Rudolph or Billy. You had a date.
Billy Mason Rudolph is
So you're going to judge him solely on his performance.
Yeah, I
You're going with Billy.
can't have my celebrity crush not be good.
So Ryan and Billy are standing outside the door.
I just can't answer that question. But like Ryan.
But there's things with them that you're not going to change, but they still feel therefore that it needs to be changed, and I'll stay here as long as it can. And someone like Harding might even probably realize that there are aspects of him that are not going to change. But I'd rather deal with Nurse Ratched. I'd rather deal with the manipulation. I'd rather deal with, at least I know what's going to go on in here, than go outside in the quote unquote real world and never know what the viewpoints are going to be, what the experiences are going to be, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely, the first part with like irony, yeah, there's certainly going to be a lot of irony there. If you were to take how about someone like Harding, where we mentioned yesterday he has the line that we're not rabbits anymore. Kind of come back to this idea that we have. So what does happen to his viewpoint? It changes. So since it changes, what is he? Character-wise, he's a dynamic character. So you certainly have some static characters that are not going to change, that are meant to emphasize certain viewpoints, but the potential for change is there. And by the way, you have a change growth theme also down at the bottom of the page. But someone like a Chief, someone like a Harding, someone even like Billy to some degree, the idea that they can change, but who causes the change? And this is going to be a lot of irony as well. It's not the medical, but it's going to be a combination of themselves and maybe even McMurphy. So, the one where Julia is arguing, and certainly not solely her, and like that you're out by yourself, you're on an island with it. The person who, maybe he is more insane than anyone else is the one who's able to get them to be able to kind of function in that world. So that whole, and this would be similar to like kind of the treatment that would be going on. The hypocrisy of it is you're treating someone for having a detachment from reality, from not being able to understand how things are, when it's the person who's doing that treatment is really the one not understanding how things go, how things work. So irony certainly being an option. Predator-prey. We mentioned dynamic characters where you start to see that change kind of taking place. Those would all be things that you could certainly use with this one. Yeah, and what most likely, you can do a couple things with it. I'd probably, from a thesis standpoint, would go point of view, and just kind of list it as that. And then within my point of view, I could get into the details about the unreliable narrator and the impact that can have. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, this would be for everyone. Since you're not going to be like opening up the book and looking at specific quotations, can you think of any ways in which the unreliability / point of view of the narrator would be significant in trying to, argue some of these points?
I mean, you could prove he's unreliable through, like, I guess, like, the size stuff, because, like, he's saying the big nurse is, like, so much taller than him, and she's, like, 5'6", and he's, like, literally 6'7", and there's, like, evidence of, like, he's this 6'7", like, 325, like, really, like, big guy.
And if Izza starts giggling, you know that she's going to be talking about McMurphy scanning in the hole in the pool while she's writing about the unreliability of narrator. So his overall perspective of things that just don't match up. Okay. Right. And you could argue there's some legitimacy to it based on how many times he's had treatments, but if you're standing there and he's standing there, what are you talking about?
There were multiple times throughout the book where he was like, walking through the hall and he said he could hear the machines in the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously not a machine in the wall, there's nothing ticking behind.
And even from a sound standpoint, anyone remember the change in sound after McMurphy punches the glass the first time and takes the cigarettes? And it's not a not like the glass shatters or anything like that. The ringing stops. So he punches through, and like the machine, not necessarily like the machinery that's all right in the wall, but everything that he's kind of associating with the combine, the wiring, and all that kind of stuff. McMurphy punches through, and it just stops. It's like he has kind of broken the machine at that point. Where that's going to be some issues. So you can't do anything.
Whenever Chief goes on about how the combine will slow down clocks, and then you also can speed it up. I think he's just talking about the human experience of being bored, when you're just you feel like time's going by slowly, but he thinks that it's literally being forced to yourself.
And certainly like from his point of view, from his perspective, especially most of these examples, when within the book are we talking? Fairly early, and so this would be before he's communicating or doing anything. That's really going to be, alone time by yourself where you can't communicate. That's really going to kind of change how time is going to pass. So these examples, especially of him being unreliable, happen earlier stages of the book. What seems to happen later stages of the book so far as his reliability? It gets more lucid. It becomes clear. It becomes the fog's not there, as much as he kind of starts to communicate. You don't hear as much about the sounds, the wiring, and all those types of things. So with his point of view, the fact that in itself does kind of change could help determine, well, how is he doing from a mental standpoint? Earlier, it's foggier. It's more convoluted. His way of thinking is a little bit foggy, more convoluted. As McMurphy helps him, as he becomes more confident in himself, as he begins to communicate, Chief is coming off now as more of a sane individual, and that reliability kind of starts to change. So you would still want to have like those specific examples that we were kind of talking about, when Virginia was going, how specific do we need? you know, if you're talking about fog or mechanical sounds in the walls and clocks changing, all that kind of stuff, that's going to be pretty good for that unreliable aspect. But the idea that the narration does change, does become more clear, does become more reliable, would certainly help kind of match up with mentally how is his thought process going. He is becoming more quote unquote normal and seems to be getting better and being treated. So that point of view, you could certainly focus on the unreliable aspect of it, but the way in which it changes would be something you could view. Those short chapters tend to be very early on in the book. As you get later on, it kind of takes more of that traditional, length of chapter, complexity of narration and whatnot. So he's getting a clearer idea of what's happening. So those would certainly be ways that you could still use that narration, even though you're not going to be quoting something word for word. No? Okay.
I still don't understand how the devices translate to the definition you're saying.
So one of the things I think that you would certainly look at, for me, I'd probably start down here in that there's not really a clear-cut definition criteria that is going to work for all the characters. So in some ways, it's almost, to use a word here, insane to try to classify these individuals as being something. You're not going to have a prompt that is going to say identify the rhetorical devices that make this person insane or something along those lines. I think if you're aware of the contrast, or not necessarily the contrast, if you're aware of the difficulty in using a label like that, you're probably going to be okay. Going with things such as, irony with the types of treatment, or like foil characters, as to how you'll have a McMurphy acting one way, and the nurse kind of going in the opposite direction. One being socially accepted by the outside world, the nurse. One being treated certainly not as accepted. But within the ward, their roles do a total reversal. That he's the person who actually kind of ends up being the one who's going to help them. So if you're good with that kind of hypocrisy that kind of exists, I think you'll be all right with it. Which I know is a terrible answer. Speaking of foil characters, this came up, I think it was maybe 7th grade. Talk about human dignity. That, we were talking about that one yesterday. That was a pretty common one that got viewed. One of the things that they mentioned, was Billy, desire for human dignity, the fact that he doesn't get it, leads to his demise at the end of the book. But kind of looked at him and Chief as almost being kind of opposites, where because Billy lacks the dignity and doesn't think that understanding is going to happen, he ends up taking his own life. Chief gains dignity. And so how does he use, and we mentioned this, how does he use death as a way to emphasize that dignity that has been gained? I'm going to give it to McMurphy by ending the life. I'm not going to let him kind of become an example. So even something like those, the contrast of two different characters using death, one with a more negative connotation to it, Chiefs being a little bit more positive by handing that dignity to McMurphy, those can even be ways in which something like a foil character. It doesn't have to be like good versus bad, but it could just kind of be the way in which similar actions are kind of done, but having a very different effect upon the character that it's impacted. When in doubt, just not that many. Remember the aliens in Sesame Street? Yep. Remember those guys? Remember them? No. They're Martians. I don't know if they're still around like when you guys were kids. Yeah, there's a blue one and a red one, and they would just go yip. I have no idea. With this one, just quick little, reminder about it. If you end up going into some kind of anti-hero argument, you could certainly use anti-hero as a rhetorical device, and probably be talking about McMurphy. If you wanted to prove how someone like McMurphy still has some heroic qualities, what is it that makes him an anti-hero? I don't mean this from a rhetorical analysis standpoint, but what is it that makes him an anti-hero? Immoral. Right. So, one of the things that we were kind of looking at with on the ward as to how he kind of ends up being that savior, we were getting into some illusion type things that were happening. And again, you don't have to use the religious illusions, but just use this as a quick little example. I could be looking at his heroic qualities based on those religious illusions and the saving that he does for the patients. If I wanted to emphasize, though, that he's not a good person, within the normal circumstances, can you think of a rhetorical device that I could use to emphasize what his negative qualities would be, or the fact that they exist? Because I think we build him up so much, understandably, that we kind of forget, okay, how can I identify what his negative aspects are? So from a literary device kind of standpoint, can you think of a tool that you would use to explain why not a good individual?
Did you see that there's like a
Motif of?
gambling?
Yeah, there certainly is. And this could have like those negative qualities. I could see someone maybe using that in a positive light, that, if you're chief, you kind of have to risk something, at some point with it. But yeah, that's true.
The only reason he was in the asylum was because he tried to get out of his initial punishment, so he kind of abuses the system.
Okay, so what are you thinking from a device standpoint with that? I mean, you're right. All right, Mr. King, why'd you ask me that question? And the reason I bring it up is because people go, okay, what kind of details again? Details are going to be like that, the factual information. So, the time on the work farm that he does gamble. When he gambles solely to win. So I'm going to manipulate other people. The stories that he even tells you about, growing up and whatnot, and coming back from the fishing trip. Any kind of bits of information that you're getting about him would count as details. The only thing you have to watch out with details is that you don't cross over into imagery. So if you're writing about like the details of the combine, where you're really kind of getting the mechanical imagery, there could be a little bit of overlap. But you certainly could use details, to highlight specific aspects about Nurse Ratched, about McMurphy, about anyone. But you're looking more at like those the facts, the info, not necessarily the conversation that goes along with it. So that can be a device. Don't forget about those, addiction details that you certainly can utilize. If you have your books with you tomorrow, I'll come from you. It's okay. I didn't even say the argument mental cases, so that's a pretty exciting gift. Like, just can't get some research that is a high quality case, but and there we go. That's the word. Okay. All right. No problem.